Marcus Aurelius is often remembered as the emperor who wrote not for history, but for his own soul. We remember Marcus Aurelius as the philosopher king, the ideal ruler Plato dreamed of but never saw, the author of Meditations, a book revered as a manual for self-mastery and virtue, the emperor who carried a book instead of a sword. In our minds, he stands as the archetype of the wise ruler, calm, just, guided by reason and by the unshakable principles of Stoicism. But history has shadows. Wisdom is not always innocent. What if the story we've been told is incomplete? What if the serene facade of the philosopher king conceals a darker truth? A paradox that lies at the very heart of his reign, a brutal contradiction between his personal philosophy and his public actions. To understand it, we have to step back into the 2nd century. Rome was the center of the known world. Its emperors were the keepers of order in a vast, restless empire. Christianity was defiant, exclusive, and dangerously uncompromising in a world that valued civic duty over private conviction. To the Roman mind, refusing to honor the gods wasn't just a personal choice, it was treason against the cosmic order itself. During Marcus Aurelius' reign, Christians in the Roman Empire faced brutal persecution. They were hunted, tortured, executed, and many driven into hiding. Some even burned. In amphitheaters, the crowd roared as wild beasts tore them apart, and Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic sage, presided over it. To some historians, he was not merely a distant figure unaware of these acts. Evidence suggests he approved, perhaps even ordered, the persecutions. This is not an easy fact to swallow. We want our heroes untarnished. But philosophy, if it is honest, does not exist to preserve illusions. And it doesn't make a person immune to evil. So here is our question. How could a man devoted to virtue, reason, and compassion allow such cruelty? Can Stoicism itself bear part of the blame? Or was this simply Marcus failing to live up to his own ideals? How do we reconcile the emperor who wrote, "What injures the hive, injures the bee," with the man who allowed his subjects to be torn apart in the arenas for their beliefs? Stoicism preaches virtue, but it also preaches endurance, acceptance, the will to live in harmony with nature and society. It teaches that the universe is rational, that everything unfolds according to nature and divine reason. Its ethics demand that we align our will with the order of the cosmos, accepting what happens as necessary. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Stoicism, stripped to its political bones, can be a dangerous philosophy for rulers. The Stoics' logic was simple. The state, the res publica, was a sacred organism. To refuse to participate in its rituals, to deny its divine mandate, was to poison the well. From his perspective, the Christians weren't simply practicing a different faith, they were actively undermining the very fabric of society, inviting the wrath of the gods upon the empire. Here is the danger. Reason, once convinced of its righteousness, can become deaf to human suffering. A man convinced he is defending cosmic order may commit atrocities and call it justice. Was it cruelty, or was it something colder, more detached? The Stoic belief that the needs of the whole outweigh the suffering of the few. This is where Stoicism's serene mask reveals its iron jaw. Its call to accept fate can become, in the wrong hands, an excuse to ignore injustice. Marcus Aurelius, the man who wrote about kindness and tolerance, may have reasoned that suppressing Christians was not cruelty, but duty, a defense of harmony. And here lies the tragic irony. Philosophy can guide us toward justice, but it can also blind us when we mistake our own perspective for the universal good. This is not to excuse Marcus Aurelius. Philosophy is not a shield against accountability. If anything, Stoicism should have sharpened his moral vision. But ideas do not float untouched in the rarefied air of the study. They are dragged into the mud when they meet politics, fear, and ambition. Marcus wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Yet Christians were treated as enemies, and vengeance, cloaked as duty, was dealt to them. In this, Marcus Aurelius failed his own creed. We can argue that Marcus was a man of his time, that persecution was normal in the ancient world. But isn't philosophy supposed to rise above the time it lives in? If Marcus could not see the injustice, then what is the point of all those meditations about virtue and the brotherhood of man? Was that hypocrisy or the inevitable tragedy of power? We want to believe that wisdom immunizes a person against injustice. But Marcus reminds us, no system of thought, however noble, is beyond corruption in the hands of power. Perhaps the lesson here is not simply that power corrupts, but that philosophy in the hands of power must be watched like fire, for it can warm or it can burn. Maybe this is the real lesson. Ideas are only as moral as the people who hold them accountable, and no one, not even a philosopher emperor, is safe from self-deception when power whispers in his ear. This is the dark side of Stoicism, not a flaw in the teachings themselves, but a chilling revelation about the human condition. It shows us that even the most rigorous philosophical systems, when wielded by those with absolute power, can be used to justify profound injustice. The very principles meant to cultivate inner peace and wisdom were twisted to validate the persecution of those who simply saw the world differently. Perhaps the real lesson is not that Stoicism failed, nor that Marcus was a hypocrite, but that philosophy has always lived in tension with the messy reality of the world. Principles are tested not in quiet reflection, but in the clamor of politics, fear, and self-interest. The story of Marcus and the Christians should be read like a warning label. This philosophy may cause blindness when mixed with authority. We should remember that our own convictions, however noble they seem, can become weapons if we decide that protecting them is more important than protecting human beings. So we return to the image of Marcus Aurelius, writing by lamplight, telling himself to be just, to be kind, to remember that all men are brothers. But outside that lamplight, another man or woman kneels in a prison cell, awaiting death because they chose a god Marcus did not. The paradox is almost unbearable. This story is not only about Marcus, it is about us. We too hold beliefs we think are righteous. We too face the temptation to confuse the survival of our worldview with the survival of truth itself. And when we do, we risk becoming exactly what we oppose. Perhaps the lesson is not to tear down Marcus Aurelius, but to remember that wisdom without empathy becomes a polished blade. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, reminds us of a hard truth. Philosophy is not a magic spell. It doesn't absolve us of our human biases, our political loyalties, or the capacity for violence. It is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used to build a beautiful garden or to build the walls of an execution chamber. The great emperor's words still echo in our hearts, but the brutal shadow of his actions reminds us to be ever vigilant. For the road to hell, it seems, can also be paved with good intentions and the most profound philosophical truths. Was he a tyrant in philosopher's clothing, or a good man who could not escape the chains of his time? Two truths can coexist. Marcus Aurelius was a great thinker, and Marcus Aurelius had blood on his hands. The question is not whether we forgive him. The question is whether, in his place, we would have done any better. Philosophy can illuminate, but it can also cast shadows, and in those shadows, even a Stoic emperor can lose his way. History paints Marcus in gold, and much of it he earned. But if we wish to honor truth, we must look at the shadows the gold cannot cover. Philosophy is not only about serenity in the garden, it is about the choices we make in the arena. The world will judge us not by the meditations we write in silence, but by the lives we spare when the crowd demands blood. If this stirred something in you, if it made you question not just Marcus Aurelius, but the ways we all can twist virtue into vice, don't let the thought slip away. Carry it, share it, because philosophy only matters if it shapes the world beyond the page. Until next time, Keep your mind sharp, your heart open, and never let your ideals become excuses.